live stream started because I accidentally dropped my phone and I'm not ready yet. And I may have said some choice words during that time. Let me go get my computer so I can share this. Do not have this on. I can hear it in the live stream. Yes, you can. Okay, gotta get my computer. Sorry if you're here. Yes, people are here. I accidentally hit live and I didn't mean to hit live, but it's fine. It's okay. We are having technical difficulties this morning because my computer is being weird. And anyhow, so I am going to share this. Hold on one second. So I can share it in our group. And as people are getting the notification to come in, make sure you can share it too. This week should be easier than last week because there is a baby in the background, which you will hear. But good morning, Bandana Grandma. But Junior is home today so that he can help me out and grab him. I'm sharing this with the group. It takes a little while. Yeah, baby. Anyhow, so Junior is home today, which is awesome. So I'm trying to get this done because he actually has some chores to do outside today. And so I want to get all of my stuff done that I can so that he can get all of his stuff done. Okay. All right, so this week we went through Genesis 35 through Exodus 3, and the majority of this was the story of Joseph. And I'm going to do a complete and total transparency here. I did not read any of this until starting yesterday. We just had a really busy week, and I did not have time to read at all. And so I started reading. It was actually an easy read, which is nice. I felt like the week before that was really a challenging read because it was so much information packed into 1 week, where with this week, it was a little bit more like, okay, here's a story, and we read through it. So the majority of this week's Bible study is about Joseph. And so it starts in Genesis chapter 35. I was worried about the little baby. I gotta worry about the 10-year-old making noise. Now, good morning, Christy. Genesis 30. I don't have a lot of notes, and so the way that I feel like this Bible study, the first 2 weeks that I did this, I was kind of all over the place. Number one, because of the baby. Number two, because I felt like I was trying to cram so much into one thing. And I almost said banana grandma. Bandana grandma says hi. Hi. And I think now I'm just gonna hit the highs. You know what I mean? Like, otherwise it'll be an hour long every day, and I just don't have an hour long every Monday to do this. So, from Genesis 35 to the end of Genesis chapter 50, we see where, Jacob has returned to his homeland. He has his children, and Jacob is called Israel. God calls Jacob Israel. God's in the business of changing names. Just like later on we'll see Saul change to Paul. Parents might call you one thing, God calls you another thing. He knows who you are more than anyone. So in chapter 35, so just remember that Jacob is also Israel. So if we change names at some point, you know who it is. It says, in verse 9, after Jacob returned from Paddan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. God said to him, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. So here was a funny note that not a funny note, but a note that I had. So God actually, he changed Jacob's name to Israel, but he is also honoring Abraham and Isaac, okay? Because both of these people he made covenants with and made promises to. And so God honors the blessing that parents speak over their children. So if you remember, Isaac had given a blessing to Jacob. And let me go back here and see if I had another thing on that. Let me see. There's so much. Yeah. Isaac gave a blessing to Jacob several chapters back. If you remember, Jacob took Esau's blessing, but God is still honoring Isaac's blessing with Jacob. And I also wrote that God honors the blessings that parents speak over their children. This was really profound for me. This is something I don't feel like I do as often as I should. So God honors the blessings that you speak over your children. And we should probably be speaking more blessings over our children than we do. Because if you go back in last week's chapters and you see that Isaac is blessing, he's giving Jacob a blessing. This is the blessing of your life. This is how your life should be. And so it was such a big traumatic event that Esau didn't get that blessing, because it's true. God honors what you speak over your children. And so that part, and there's really nothing in this chapter that says that. It's just, this is what you get from reading the books of the Bible in order, is you remember the chapters you read last time, and you can apply it to this time. So it's really interesting to see that even though Jacob has done all of these things, God is still honoring Jacob. He's more so honoring Isaac. So, in the blessing that he spoke over Jacob. So, I thought that was really, really interesting to kind of see take place. Now, Jacob has his children, and Joseph was one of Jacob's beloved. Junior, can you please turn that down? We know Joseph. That is encouraging. Yes. It was encouraging to me too. It was actually I feel like this is something that we knew, but we just don't do as often. And you can speak blessings over your children no matter what their age is. I mean, Isaac blessed Jacob, and Jacob was much older, so it doesn't have to be just when they're little. It can be when they're in their 40s too. So it was a really good reminder for me. I feel like I pray for my kids a lot. Like I pray for their protection. I pray for their health. I pray for their future spouses, if that's what God's will is for them. But I don't necessarily speak a lot of blessings over them. So that's something that I'm going to work on personally. Okay, so in chapter 37, we skipped over 36, verse 3, it says, "Now Israel," which is Jacob, "loved Joseph," which is his son, "more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him." So this is where we're talking about Joseph's coat of many colors. "When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him." I wrote this note over here saying sibling jealousy happened in every generation. Can you see that rivalry in every generation that good morning, Diane, that we have read through up until this point. We've gone through a lot of them. There is sibling rivalry that is great. I mean, so great that these people want to kill each other because of it. So I wrote here, if you pay attention, a lot of times the sibling rivalry happens from the side or the sibling that isn't getting that isn't as honoring as the other sibling. So in this case, Joseph was just Jacob's favorite because he was born in his old age. But to make matters worse, so they were already jealous of him. So to make matters worse, God was giving Joseph dreams. And Joseph shared those dreams with his brothers and his family. And it almost sounds like he's boasting about it. Like, oh, in the dream, his brothers and his family bowed down to him. And it sounds like he's boasting, but I really we don't know. But I think he was just sharing the dreams that he had because he thought it was interesting. And so if that just made it worse. And so the interesting note that I wrote is that sibling jealousy happened with every generation, but it seemed to often happen when one was like in depth called by God. Okay, and we're gonna see that unfold with the story of Joseph, which I really, really enjoy the story of Joseph. Joseph is one of my son's favorite stories from when he was little. If you have children, there's actually a Joseph movie. Did Disney put it out? I don't remember if Disney put it out or who put it out. But it's like it's a legit. It was in theaters and everything, and it's called Joseph. It's a really good movie. If you have kids, you should check it out. But he's liked it ever since he was little. So, so we know the story. Joseph's brothers hate him, and they end up plotting to kill him, but instead Reuben steps in, which is one of his older brothers, and says, let's not kill him. You know, Reuben had a really good heart, and we can see that throughout this story. And instead they sold him. And Joseph ended up in Potiphar's house. So he went to Egypt, and he ended up working for the Egyptian government. In other words, it's how it worked out. High up, Pharaoh, all that stuff. So he found himself in Potiphar's house. So in chapter 39, it says, verse 1, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. I know my daughter wants some good sound Bible movies. Yeah, so Joseph is a really great Bible movie, if you haven't checked it out yet. So we go through this chapter, first part of 39. It talks about how Potiphar trusted Joseph. Joseph prospered with everything that he touched. He found favor with Potiphar. Not only, like, God blessed Joseph, and so in return, God blessed Potiphar because Joseph was there. But that wasn't the only reason that Potiphar gave so much to Joseph. Potiphar trusted Joseph not because of just his blessing, but because of his work ethic too. And you'll see that as you read. Joseph had an amazing work ethic. Not only did Joseph have an amazing work ethic, he also was extremely wise in business. And so as we get further into the story, when we talk about the feast and the famine, Joseph has this amazing plan to just combat the famine portion of the 7 years that are going to happen in Egypt. And so Joseph was not only blessed because of the blessing of God, but he also, just as a human in general, was extremely smart, had great work ethic, had great character, could be highly trusted, and I want to be like Joseph. I mean, he had this thing done to him. Can you imagine being a young boy? I mean, he was probably more like a teenager, and getting sold to these people, getting taken away from your family, and you know, finding yourself in a good situation where you're blessed and highly favored. But it's just interesting to see that the blessings that he received ended up being more than enough to cover his grief for having to leave his family. So Potiphar's wife. So Potiphar gave anything Joseph wanted. He gave it to him except for his wife. And Potiphar's wife, typical Jezebel, wanted Joseph. She wanted him. And Joseph said no. He wouldn't even go around her, okay? Which is an important topic because, you know, if you know, and if you're in the United States, Vice President Mike Pence, he actually does not even meet alone with women because of the position that puts him in, where somebody could accuse him of something that he didn't do. And that's actually kind of what happens here. I didn't circle the verse, but there's a verse in here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Okay, so in chapter 39, verse 11, it says, One day Joseph, went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. So see, that was really important because there were no witnesses. And so just a few verses before that, it says, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. So I thought that was really interesting that a man of his character and his position, just like Vice President Mike Pence, doesn't put himself in a situation that could get kind of iffy there, where there's no witnesses. I'm not saying that everyone needs to do that, Obviously, there's situations where you can't do that. Like in my job, throughout my whole life, there's been situations where I've had to have lunch meetings with men. I've had to have meetings with men privately. I didn't ever really feel uncomfortable, but it was just, I mean, it's just something to think about. So anyhow, so he went in that moment, and Potiphar's wife pulled his robe and ripped it and kept it. David fled. And she took that opportunity to lie about Joseph because he wouldn't go to bed with her. She was mad at him. And she told Potiphar that Joseph tried to sleep with her. And so Potiphar naturally got mad, threw him in prison, forgot about him. What's funny is that while Joseph was there in prison, it says in verse 20, but while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. No matter what Joseph did, no matter where Joseph was, God always placed him in a place of leadership. And that was Joseph's calling from the beginning, from day one. That was Joseph's calling, was to be in a place of leadership. And so no matter where he was or what he was doing, he was risen to a point of leadership, even in the lowest of lows. And you know what? Joseph took it. Joseph didn't complain, not at least in the Bible. Maybe in real life he did. He took it, and he knew that God was going to remember him because God always remembered him. So in prison, we have two people. After it says, after some time, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, and he threw him in the prison. And so they had dreams, and they wanted to interpret them. Well, Joseph had the gift of interpreting dreams. And it's funny because Joseph says, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. And so Joseph never took credit for it. He would say, no, I can't interpret your dreams, but God can, because God is the one who gave them to you. So Joseph interprets their dreams. He tells them what's going to happen. The cupbearer in 3 days is going to go back to the Pharaoh, and he is going to get his job back. But the baker in 3 days is going to get impaled and killed. So, go on. Go take him. All right, go so I can finish this. So, the one stipulation of interpreting the dreams for Joseph was, he told them, if this comes to pass, remember me and tell Pharaoh and Potiphar that I'm still here and I don't belong here. Well, they forgot about him. Well, obviously, the one guy died. The cupbearer forgot about him. It was 2 years, okay, 2 years before, yes, God's grace and plan evidence. We don't know the ending, but God does. And the thing that we're leading up to is that one of my favorite quote in this entire story is when Jacob says, if we skip forward, I'm going to go back, but we skip forward to chapter 45. When Jacob says, God sent me ahead of you. So Jacob didn't blame his brothers or anything, but we're going to lead up to that. Climax, okay? So 2 years after the cupbearer was released, Potiphar has a dream, or Pharaoh has a dream, Pharaoh has a dream, and the cupbearer's like, I forgot about Joseph. In fact, he says, I kind of laughed when I read it. Let's see. I should have highlighted the verse. Where is it? Joseph dream. Okay, so verse 9, it says, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Duh. It was kind of like a duh movement. I totally forgot about Joseph in the dungeon, in the basement. You should probably check him out because he can interpret your dream. So Pharaoh has these two dreams. One is about cows. 7 healthy cows come out. And then 7 unhealthy cows come out and they eat the healthy cows. And the same with grain. You have 7 sheaves of grain, 7 ugly grains. And so Joseph interprets, they come and get him, and he interprets Pharaoh's dreams for him, that they're going to have 7 years of feast, and then directly after that, 7 years of famine. Junior, can you turn it down? So, let's see. So, Pharaoh is looking for someone who can figure this all out, because obviously he doesn't want Egypt to go into the pits and everybody die. So Jacob tells him his plan, which is a really good plan. Of course, during your years of feast, you store away storehouses of food. That way, during your years of famine, you have food. Same concept as prepping, which I thought was really interesting. Same concept as homesteading. That it is the ultimate example of prepping and homesteading, because they took the time, the years of feast that they had, and they put all of this stuff away. Mostly grains, because those are the things that store the most. And then that way, during the years of famine, they would have enough. Of course, Egypt would be in control of it, but they would still have enough so that they wouldn't perish. So Pharaoh hires Joseph. So Joseph finds himself in power, in a pretty big place of power, once again. So Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of all of Egypt, which is quite interesting. And just like that, Joseph's dreams start coming true. Now, Joseph didn't have, think of how long that was, where Joseph had this promise in a dream given to him. And look how many years it took to actually fulfill that dream, which was really interesting to me. So he was put in power, in charge of Egypt. So people bowed down to him. People listened to him. He was in a place of power. And so the next step is Joseph's family bowing down to him, just like his dreams. So Jacob sends Joseph's brothers to Egypt because they're in the land of Canaan, and Canaan is also affected by the famine. So you have to think, the feast years have already gone by, so even that's a long time. Now we're in the years of famine. So Jacob sends his other sons, to go get grain in Egypt, but he holds back Benjamin. Now remember that Benjamin is the youngest son, and so he holds back Benjamin and says, I'm not sending Benjamin. I would die if something happened to him. Benjamin was kind of like the new favorite because he was unexpected and was also born to Jacob in Jacob's old age. So they didn't take Benjamin. They went. Joseph kind of gave them a hard time. Joseph was maybe a little bit bitter. Wouldn't you be a little bit bitter? And he didn't really believe them, I don't think, that Benjamin was a person. And so they came, and he accused them of being spies, and they said, no, we're not spies. And so Joseph said, we'll prove it. And they said, here's our lineage, here's who we are, here's who our father is. We had another brother, he's gone. We have a younger brother, he's at home. And so Joseph says, well, I don't believe you. I'm going to hold your, I think it was Simeon. I'm going to hold Simeon captive. And you need to go get your other brother and bring him here so I know you're telling the truth. In the meantime, Joseph's heart and character, it has to come through, because he can't just be bitter and then not be gracious as well. So Joseph ends up actually giving them all of their silver back that they paid to buy the grain. And they discover this about halfway home, and they're like, oh my gosh, this must be a mistake. But they kept going, So Joseph, in all of his graciousness and all of his anger and all of his hurt, still blessed them and gave them their money back. So they got back, and they tell Jacob, Father, this isn't working. They have taken Simeon captive. They need Benjamin. And Jacob says, no, I'm not sending him. And they go through this issue. It must have been months, because it says that they went through all of their grain, and they needed to go back and get more. So long story short, Jacob ends up letting them take Benjamin. We go through this whole thing with Joseph again, where Joseph wants to hold Benjamin now back. And so anyhow, it ends up where you can read through the story. Everybody comes back. All the brothers come back, including Benjamin. And we get to chapter 45. And this is my favorite part in the whole story, because what an example and what an amazing outlook on life. So we know that Joseph went through all of these trials until he got to the point that he's at. He saw God's faithfulness. His brothers bowed down to him when he first met with them. Even his father bowed down to him when he ended up coming. But Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers in chapter 45. And Joseph said, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." How many people today do you think that God sends ahead? I can think of a situation, God is obviously someone who honors callings. God has a plan for every single person. We can't deny that. We can't deny that just in the first 45 chapters of the Bible. God has a plan for every person. God honors blessings that parents give to their children. And God had a plan for Joseph. But how many Josephs are there in the world? How many of us have gone through something and wondered, why in the world am I going through this? And then hindsight's 2020, 20 years from then, something happens and maybe it saved somebody else's life. Maybe you were able to preach into somebody's life and they get saved in general. Maybe your trial or tribulation is your testimony. That is the testimony needed to save someone. What if you're in the right place at the right time where someone doesn't die? Junior, take him out and put him back on the sofa. What if, there are things that happen every day. We would never know, okay? We wouldn't know if, your child may save someone else from it. Yeah, it might. And, the other thing is, how many situations are we in that we don't know might have saved someone's life, whether it's physical, spiritual, emotional, because the outcome was good. We don't know what the alternative outcome would be. So the other part of that is the hard part. For example, you may have seen me post in the Homestead Homemaking group about a mother who lost her 3-month-old son. And I'm not going to really comment on that, but it reminds me, she's been saying how his organs, they donated his organs, have been donated to multiple other children and saved their lives. What if God sent him ahead of everyone for that purpose? That's a hard thing to swallow. That's a hard thing to think about. God loves every single one of us, but maybe our purpose doesn't look as glamorous as somebody else's purpose. Maybe our purpose is to go through these trials to get to a point to where we're saving other people, whether it's physically or spiritually. What if one of those babies is the next Moses? It's interesting to think that all of this stuff has a reason and a purpose. And so even, if Joseph's brothers hadn't sold him, would it have happened another way? Maybe. But it's interesting how God uses their anger, their jealousy, their bitterness, their sin in selling Joseph to then make his plan happen, which is to save Egypt, which is to save Jacob's family, who God has a covenant with Isaac and Jacob, and it's to save them. And so that required Joseph to go through a lot of stuff for that to happen. It's really interesting for me to see that play out, and it kind of makes you look at your own life and kind of makes your trials and tribulations a little less painful, a little less of a sting, because no matter what happens, there's a reason. There may not be a reason then, but there's a verse in the Bible that says God works all things for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. And that's what we just saw. Like, we just saw Joseph loves God. Jacob loves God. Isaac loved God. We see them walk through this. And through all of it, God made all things happen for good. So it's a happy ending. It's a great story. He's always holding our hand. And we like to blame God for a lot of stuff. We like to say, you did this, or why didn't you fix this? Could it be that had to happen in order for something 20 years from now to happen that could save someone, or that could change the world? And it seems minute. Oh, Joseph was sold. Okay, sorry, he has a really bad life. Something that simple saves a nation. Because he was available, he was there, he was sent ahead of everybody. So, my encouragement to you this week is to look at your trials and your tribulations that you might be going through. What you're walking through. Now, granted, there's just some things that we walk through that just happen in life, okay? But what if they had a purpose? What if they mean something? My encouragement is for you to sit down and kind of look what you're walking through, or look what you have walked through, and apply the story of Joseph and this quote out of everything. God sent me ahead. What if you are walking through a tribulation or trial that'll help your children in the long run? What if this person had to die so that this person could live, because this person's going to change lives? But if they died, those lives wouldn't be changed. What if you got sick because God wanted to reveal himself more through your sickness? There's just so many scenarios that we can't even scratch the surface of this. But think, God sent me ahead. There's a reason for this, and even if there's not a reason for it now, there's a purpose. Maybe there's not a purpose for it now. Maybe we won't see the purpose for another year, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Maybe you won't even be here. You won't even be here when the purpose is revealed. That's why the Jesus lineage is important. That's why when we go through Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, we have all of these lineages that are starting to become a little bit blurry now. But it's important because it all leads up to Jesus. So there's even a greater picture. All of these situations that we're reading about right now have to happen to get to Jesus. So not only are these little cluster situations happening, like with Joseph, in order for Joseph to save a nation, to save his family, these things had to happen for Joseph. But this had to happen to Joseph for us to get to Jesus. What if we are all part of a more grand story than just our little bubble that we're in? What are we leading up to? We all kind of know this answer. We're leading up to Jesus' second coming. And it's just happening all over again, just in different ways. So my encouragement to you this week is to think about that. It kind of helps me personally to think about it, to go forward thinking about situations that might happen. If I hide this in my heart, God sent me ahead, then I might be able to handle situations better in the future. I might be able to help someone else better in the future with something that they're going through. Now, we did get into Exodus, and I'm not even going to touch on that. I am going to say maybe just a couple things, but we're starting the story of Moses, and this is going to be a lot. So we ended with Exodus 3, which is Moses has already grown. So in the beginning, the story of Moses is Moses, Pharaoh at the time. Years have gone by. I mean, Joseph wasn't even known to the Pharaoh anymore. That's how many years have gone by. He did not like, this is the war of all time, right? He didn't like that the Israelites and Hebrews, basically, were outnumbering the Egyptians. And he was scared. It was fear. And so he wanted the midwives to kill all the babies, the baby boys. The midwives refused to do it, and they made the excuse that Hebrew women were not like the Egyptian women. They delivered their babies before we even get there. So they lied. But God honored that because God honors life givers, okay? And so he blessed the midwives, and he saved these children through these midwives because they stood up and they didn't do what the Pharaoh told them to do. We could do a lot more of that in today's society, but we stay quiet. But I'm not going to get on that soapbox. So we go through Moses. Moses' mother has him. She's scared. She nurses him for the first few months. She's scared that people will find out and kill him. She puts him in his little wicker basket, sends him up the Nile, and Pharaoh's daughter finds him. Now, Pharaoh's daughter couldn't nurse him. So coincidentally, Moses' mother and his sister actually was walking up the Nile, and she saw Pharaoh's daughter pick him up, and she went to Pharaoh's daughter and said, hey, do you want me to go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse him? Since she couldn't do it. She said, sure. So coincidentally, she goes and gets her mother. And so Moses' mother still kind of gets to raise him to a certain point, but she has to give him back to Pharaoh's daughter. And I read that, and I went into Everett's room, and I just laid there beside him thinking, how could you do that? I mean, how painful that must be to first of all give your baby away because you love him so much you're scared they're going to kill him. Then get him back, nurse him, nourish him for months on end, and then have to give him back again. So that's hard. But her love for him was more than, she loved him more. Okay? So I thought that was really important. And then the other thing that was important was in chapter 2, verse 23. Hold on. I'll get that. Chapter 2, verse 23 says, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard them groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. And so now we're getting into Moses. We've read about the burning bush. God is setting the table yet again for a man who's going through trials and tribulations to be a great leader. Have you noticed that in the Bible, the great leaders have to go through trials and tribulations? The world changers, the community changers they have to go through a lot of stuff. But we're going to get on that next week. So going back to Joseph, remember that what you learned this week. If you're just coming in, a lot of you just came in, you can go back and rewatch this video. I'm getting ready to end it because I've been on for about 38 minutes, still longer than I wanted to do today. But I thought it was just a great, great story and reminder of us for our own trials and tribulations. And remember, God is sending us ahead of something. And he's also using our pain and our hurt and our trials and tribulations for something greater, a greater story, a greater timeline that we don't know about, but he does. And so we just have to trust him through the process. All right, guys, let's continue the discussion down below. If you are, hi, Nikki, you can go back and watch. You can continue the discussion below if you are not in our Facebook Homestead Homemaking group. If you are a woman and you want to join our Facebook Homestead Homemaking group, click in the description below. It'll take you to my blog and give you the link of all that. you can continue the discussion there if you want to. All right, guys, have a great day. Happy homesteading, happy homemaking, and happy Bible reading. Bye, guys.